to over time. Otherwise, welcome. Some of you have already seen me make announcements. I'm Mélanie Frappier, and for those of us working on mathematicians, we have finally arrived to the most important session of the term, mathematical transmission of knowledge. We had a tiny bit of this in Leslie Cormack session, but of course we want a lot more of this. And we have three people from across the world today to bring this a beautiful end. First, Torsten Bendl from Regensburg, who's going to tell us about Stöckl.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be able to speak here. I don't know how many people are online, but yeah, hello over there as well. And so yeah, if you are especially interested in the history of maths, I am afraid I have to disappoint you because I'm not talking that much about maths, but instead I'm talking about an old white guy in the midst of Germany, in the midst of Central Europe, about Karl Stöckl. Karl Stöckl, in my opinion, is a very interesting figure because he did not really circulate as a person. We will see soon after that he very much stayed at the same place all of his life. But instead, he circulated knowledge for and within Germany, for German audiences, within German academia, but also towards the German general public. So I will now start with a very brief summary of the biography of Karl Stöckl, and then we'll contrast that to the things Stöckl was actually doing, which was mostly writing translations, writing abstracts of scientific articles, and also doing work for science popularization. Stöckl was born in 1873 in a very small Bavarian town called Eichstätt. He then in the late 1890s studied physics and mathematics in Munich, where he also then wrote his dissertation. He then had a very brief phase of like a postdoc life within mostly Bavaria. So he had stays in Munich, in Würzburg, and also, and that was very extraordinary, very far away, in Berlin. He then went to the University of Tübingen, where he worked as a research assistant. Tübingen at that time also part of Bavaria, and then he worked at the Meteorological Institute at Munich until 1904, when he was called as an assistant professorship or außerplanmäßiger Professor at the Lyceum in Passau, another very small Bavarian town. Lyceum is a very interesting type of university, which at least in this regard only existed in Bavaria at the time. It was something between school and university, maybe comparable to the Anglo-American college. So it was possible, so that you went there to teach when you became a professor, but you had not really a chance to do your own research. There, it was mostly there for students who wanted to study theology and become priests, but they also needed to attend lectures in the natural sciences, for example. In 1914, he then gained full professorship, and after World War I, in 1919, he then changed to the Lyceum in Regensburg, where he then remained for the rest of his life until 1959. So you see, there was not much change going on in Stöckl's life. I was inspired by all the fancy maps in the previous talks, where you can show how people and how goods were transported and circulated around the world. So I did the same with Stöckl's life. You see the red circle, that was like 99% of Stöckl's life was taking place with this one very brief 6 months period where he was in Berlin, still in Germany. But you see, it cannot get more Eurocentric than what I'm doing right now. Nevertheless, Stöckl's case is very interesting because even though he did not circulate himself, I would argue he circulated knowledge and ideas of science at this time in the first half of the 20th century in Germany. And he did this through three activities, I would argue. The first one was he was doing translations from English to German to make them accessible for a German audience. He wrote more than 10,000 abstracts of scientific journals or scientific articles for so-called abstract journals. I will come to that later. And the last thing, in my opinion, where he circulated and translated and transferred knowledge was through popularization, where he translated knowledge from the academic sphere to the general public with presentations, but also popularizing articles. I will now go through all of the three activities one by one. So the first one I want to emphasize was his work as a literal translator. He translated at least 22 several scientific papers from mostly fields of electrochemistry and crystallography, one also of an astronomical nature, between 1901 and 1922, from English to German. And while most of them are like very extraordinary, because it was mostly British or American scientists he translated to German, there is one case that, in my opinion, stands out, and that's the case of the Indian chemist Nilratan Dar, who later became the founder and the head of the Indian Chemical Society. But in 1913 and 1914 had his first scientific papers published in the German Zeitschrift für Elektrochemie, the German Journal for Electrochemistry, when he was still a student in Calcutta. And what it makes even more interesting to me is that this was not a translation of an already published paper or already published papers, but it was the first publications of Dar at all. So Stöckl must have translated the handwritten manuscripts by Dar. And that's a curiosity to me because I still cannot figure out how this connection came into being. Dar only later in 1915 had his first trip to Europe, to London. So it was still, when he still was in Calcutta, and I would assume not very popular in European science. So that's the first paper I could find Dar was publishing, which was translated by Stöckl. And what's also interesting in this case, in my opinion, is that Dar mentioned that in his autobiography, Reflections on Chemical Education, that he published in 1973, that his first papers were published in German journals, but he does not mention that they were published in German, and he also does not mention that they were translated by a German scientist. And additionally, when he published his bibliography, he uses these papers, but he publishes them with their English title, even though they never were published in an English journal, only in the German journals with a German title. So that's a very interesting case to me, but I cannot figure out why this was the case. Nevertheless, after World War I, Stöckl basically only translated one further scientific work, but that's the one he probably is the most, well, famous, if you want to say it like this, and that was Robert A. Millikan's The Electron, which was published by Millikan in 1917, and it was translated into German and then published by Stöckl in 1922. Here's what it looks like. In 1923, Robert Millikan gained the Nobel Prize for Physics after it, for the first, so it was his 17th nomination, but for the first time in that year, he was nominated by a German physicist. I don't know if this person had read the German version of The Electron, but I found this a very, very interesting coincidence. And what I also found was correspondence between Karl Stöckl and Robert Millikan, which started in 1921 when Stöckl reached out to Millikan if it was okay if he would translate the electron into German, which was also very interesting because not even the publisher where Stöckl published the German translation knew about Millikan's original work. So Stöckl came first to the publisher and then asked them if they would like to publish it, and then asked Millikan if he could translate it. Also very interesting dynamic here in the background. Going back to the Nobel Prize, Robert Millikan then also, after Stöckl congratulated Millikan for the Nobel Prize, Millikan wrote to Stöckl, let me thank you very heartily for your congratulations upon the award of the Nobel Prize. I have no doubt that you were partially responsible for this recommendation because of the fact that you have made known my work so well in your translation of my little book. So here, at least in this writing, in this letter, Millikan is very thanks Stöckl quite a lot. When Millikan talks to the general public, he never mentions the publication. So neither in publications, nor in speeches, not even in the Nobel speech he gave in the very same year. So Stöckl remains invisible with this translation, with Millikan's outreach. It's only in the internal correspondence that they talk to each other and where Millikan thanks Stöckl for the translation. Now, the second activity Stöckl was doing, in my opinion, for circulating knowledge towards German academia was writing abstracts. Stöckl wrote through his life from 1901 until his death, 1959, more than 10,000 abstracts for several German so-called abstract journals, or Berichtshefte in German, which were journals that were only there to publish summaries, short summaries of scientific articles towards several fields. So Stöckl wrote for abstract journals that were dedicated towards physics, towards chemistry, towards astronomy, towards medicine even, towards ophthalmology, so eye medicine. So he used very, very specific journals where he published, but he mostly wrote about articles that were published within physics, chemistry, and astronomy. But also, for this, it came to an advantage of him that he not only spoke German and English, but also French and Italian. And so he also wrote summaries of articles that were published in French journals and Italian journals in the respective languages, and made them famous among the German public. Here we see an example of one of the abstracts Stöckl wrote. So on the left side, we see the script that can be found in the collections of Stöckl, and then on the right side we see how it was published in the abstract journal. So it's very, let's say, puristic way of publishing. It's just the titles of the names of the authors, the titles, and then this short summary, which is between one line or one sentence and up to like 2 pages long. And throughout his life, Stöckl wrote more than 10,000 of them, most of them in the period between 1938 and 1943. So during World War II. And that was because Stöckl lost in 1936 his position as a professor during the NS regime. That was because they dissolved the lycees in Germany because they were in conflict. They were Catholic institutions and they were in conflict with the NS ideology. And therefore, Stöckl needed another source of income, and one of his main sources then was writing these abstracts, and also because he was one of the very few people in Germany that also still had access towards international scientific journals. One example how these abstracts were also received, it's very hard to find evidence that these abstracts were actually read because nobody quotes the abstract. If you cite people, then you cite their actual work and not the abstract that were written. But I found this very interesting postcard written by the Munich physicist Arnold Sommerfeld, in 1947, who wrote to Stöckl, "Dear colleague, your Hale review was quite interesting to me. I only knew vaguely about it through my friend Bendl, a Swiss physicist, about the periodic change of their polarity of the solar spots, the sunspots. I didn't know anything about. Thank you very much for giving me attention towards this." And then he goes on with writing, "Well, I have published a new book, but I made sure that the publisher will send you a copy, maybe with having in mind that Stöckl would write an abstract on this book, but I haven't read every 10,000 abstracts Stöckl has published, so I don't know if he also talked about Sommerfeld's book in this time." The last activity I want to talk about Stöckl was doing, and which is something that, in my opinion, is very often overlooked, but nevertheless very important, is his work as a popularizer. So I would there broaden the notion of translation towards translating knowledge from the academic spheres towards the general public, to the public spheres, and then also make scientific knowledge accessible for non-trained people with science. So Stöckl wrote dozens of scientific popularizing articles for newspapers and journals in Germany, but also, as we will see right now, in a few journals that were published in the United States and in one case in the Netherlands. Usually, so in the beginning, he was mostly covering like technological developments, but especially after 1910, after the appearance of the Halley comet, one sees a very big shift towards astronomical topics in his writings. And he also, so he wrote for several different journals. The names are not that important, but they also, what they show is that they cover different audiences. So the first one, Neueste Erfindungen und Erfahrungen, that was basically one for a completely non-trained general public that had like no background in any scientific knowledge or even school training. So one finds everything in them, like recipes, writings on how to garden, and also, news of science and new discoveries that were made. And the second one was headed towards an engineering audience. The third one towards a Catholic audience. And the third and the fifth one, for example, the fourth and the fifth one, for example, they were specifically astronomical popularizing journals. And then, of course, we also have, as I mentioned, the Scientific American Popular Astronomy and the Wetenschappelijke Bladen in the Netherlands, where we also had at least one article published each. And then apart from that, we have also several newspapers where he also covered scientific problems, but of course in a much more broadened way, because they were headed towards a very local, but also very general public. One of the example I brought here was this one article that he published in Popular Astronomy in 1921 on the bright rays on the moon, which that was basically then translated back to English by an unknown person, and in which he basically gives an explanation on the rays on the moon that we can see, because he compares it with a geological structure that we see in the Bavarian forest. We also mentioned the city names like Roding and Klapperstrass. Not even I know where Klapperstrass might be, even though I am from Bavaria. So I found that a very, very interesting way to describe this phenomenon. And where he then explains that this both shows how these structures appear when celestial bodies shrink. And then so he explains the bright rays on the moon as a remnant of a shrinking moon, and with the same of the Pfahl, which would also show that Earth was shrinking, which is not the today's state of explanation of these phenomena. What he also did, and what I think was his main goal, because he was, when people write about him, which is not often the case, but if it's the case, it's mostly on his public lectures, and also in the correspondence I discovered most of the people that write to Stöckl relate towards his lectures he gave to the general public on topics related mostly to astronomy, but also physics, technology, and also important, in his sense, important historical figures of science with a very, let's say, nationalistic notion. So for him, it was very important to also show the German scientists and their contributions to their expressive fields. He already started doing that very young as a student. So the first public lecture I could find is from 1896, when he still was a student in Munich, and where he gave a public talk on atmospheric electricity. And then especially after he came to Regensburg, he already started that in Passau, but especially after he came to Regensburg, he basically exploded in giving public lectures. It was basically 2 or 3 times every week for several different audiences. So for the general public, for certain clubs, for postal officers, for soldiers, for truck drivers even, so for several different audiences, and also covering many different topics. So for example, here we can also see a script of a talk he gave to members of the postal office, where he talks about the origin of the zodiac signs and the zodiac in itself, and how the astrological zodiac differs from the actual astronomical phenomenon that we can see. So to summarize, Stöckl wrote dozens of articles for newspapers and journals in the United States, in the Netherlands, but of course mostly in Germany. He gave it's not the summary, the conclusion yet. Sorry. He also opened, and that's my last point of his activities. He also opened the observatory that existed in Regensburg, and that was one of the reasons why Stöckl wanted to come to Regensburg in the first place, because the Lyceum there, yeah, thank you, had an observatory. He opened that for the general public and transformed it into a public observatory, so an observatory that was specifically dedicated towards the general public. Here we can see an image of Stöckl showing people his dome and the telescope and then the stars in his observatory. So to summarize, Stöckl's contributions to science were mostly through knowledge translation and circulation. So Stöckl made scientific knowledge accessible for German audiences that were not able to either speak English, French, Italian, or had access to these journals with abstracts and also like literal translations. But he also translated scientific knowledge towards the general public with his work as science popularization. And my last point would be that Stöckl was not alone in this. So I think he's an interesting case to reveal how these like backdoor activities of science took place. But of course, he was not the only one. He was one among many others. But those are people that remain mostly hidden or invisible. And so I hope that this case shows that these people also should be looked at it a little bit more. Thank you very much.
Since we've started 5 minutes late, we have 5 minutes for questions. My computer just died, so I will let you monitor what's happening online. Are there any questions from online or in person before I jump in? Well, I'll jump in. I have many questions, but it will fill us. So there are many things that are weird here, and for someone who dies basically when Einstein died. We see nothing about relativity, we see nothing about quantum mechanics, and anything presented to us. So my question is it just because it's not there, or is it just because in the selection you offered?
It's just because of the selection I offered. He writes very early, already in 1920, he starts giving public presentations on the theory of relativity. He also has a article in Sirius in 1922 where he discusses a little bit on Einstein's theory of relativity, but it doesn't really play a major role. So it is there, but also, so for example, I didn't find a single abstract Stöckl was writing on Einstein. He was covering several physicists, but I did not find one that he wrote on the papers of Einstein. That might be because of the distributions, how the abstract journals worked, but as far as I saw it, he accepted it very soon. He very soon talked about it and also defended it in the scripts that I read from the 1920s, but it doesn't play a major role in what he was doing. Yeah, so they might even have met each other in Munich because they were studying at the same time in Munich, but I didn't find any connection between the two of them.
Right. And there's really a periodization in what he seems to be doing, except for the public talks, which seems to be really his life. He's clearly a teacher. But if you look at, first he does the translations into German, and then the abstracts. And so the translation into German, but they basically stop in the 30s, I guess, or something like that.
In 1922. So Robert Millikan's The Electron was his last translation.
And it seems to happen at a time where American science is starting to pick up and British science is starting to pick up and have their own journals that are starting to have a certain recognition. And so I thought it was like really impressive to see someone saying, I'm going to help you publish in the best journals, right? And when you don't need that anymore, he stops doing it. And I was wondering if you told us about Dar and how you don't know how he comes to it. Is there any indications about if he's commissioned by editors or by authors to translate their texts, or
not at all? So the only translation where I can trace the background is The Electron. Right. That's the only one. But with the translations that took place for the scientific journals, I couldn't find anything. That might be because that took place when Stöckl was a professor in Passau, and most of the material I can work with in Regensburg also originates from his Regensburg time, so it might be lost. But I didn't find any clue on how these journal translations took place.
Because I was wondering, like, how common it was for academics like him to take this on themselves, if they were paid, if that was, you know, a side business, or if it was just, I'm helping people reach an international audience, just like sometimes you see people saying, oh, well, our journal is going to help people whose English is not their first language. You'll get a copy that can actually pass into stage.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, but I cannot answer it because I don't have material on that. I only know with Millikan that Stöckl somehow got a copy of The Electron and then went to the publishers. And so with his first publisher, he was rejected because they said that it was, first of all, an economical disaster, but also because that shortly after World War I, we do not want to engage and emphasize foreign, especially French and English science.
There's this barrier.
Yeah, so only with his second publisher, he had more luck that they were more open to it, but they didn't even know Millikan's book.
Right, and you know the Boer's Fest, right, that bring, when Boer comes to Germany after the war, right, to kind of reestablish since 1920. So he's right there with Boer trying to rebuild international collaborations, which is pretty spectacular. Well, let's thank our speaker.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just I don't know what to do.
Okay, you can notice you can say actually that piece, remain there, that's going to be perfect. Yeah, you don't have to do anything else.
Okay, then I'll just stay where I am.
Yes, this way, Clément va être capable de partager son écran. Puis je vais même.
So can you see it?
Oui, très bien.
Formidable.
Présentement, nous le voyons en mode de éditorial.
Je vais. Hop. Can you see it full screen now?
Yes, you can. And I'll just adjust here so that we can hide our comments.
Hold it.
Maybe they'll disappear. Top view. View at the top. View top. Thank you. Standard side by side. But it's that bar, I'm supposed to be able to make it disappear, right?
You can minimize that screen if you just have it on it.
Yeah, it's this one at the bottom.
You want to stop the chat or you want to get rid of the camera? Can you just move it over? That's me.
No worry.
Yeah, just exit off.
I'll get rid of the chat.
You may be able to drag, see the little gray bit between the picture and the PowerPoint.
I think that will be it. Ok. Alors, bienvenue à Clément Bonvoisin qui nous vient de l'Université de Paris-Cité, du Laboratoire Stöckl. And Clément, to whom I must apologize because I was not able to figure out how to make Zhou properly write his first name, is going to talk to us about appropriating Soviet knowledge in mathematics. Solomon Lefschetz.
Yes.
A project on differential equations at Princeton University's 46 to 59.
All right. So first of all, I want to warmly thank the organizers of this amazing conference for all the work you have probably put together to achieve this. And I also want to thank you for the efforts on making this in hybrid format, which allows me to speak to you today from Paris here. And so, yes, I'm Clément Bonvoisin. I'm currently a PhD candidate at Université Paris-Cité in the Sphere department, which is a department in history and philosophy of science broadly, and I work more specifically in the history of mathematics. And today I'm going to talk to you about the appropriation of Soviet knowledge in mathematics with a specific focus on differential equations at Princeton University. So the general framework in which this talk is situated is obviously that of translations and circulations of mathematical knowledge. It's a commonplace thing to see that there are tensions between the circulations of knowledge and some linguistic barriers, the appropriation of foreign language, of foreign knowledge, for instance, written in foreign language, entails a specific work for actors to overcome this friction, and this work is more specifically translation work. And the case of mathematics, and more specifically modern mathematics, but you could argue that it's similar for mathematics as a whole, is that it has a strong translinguistic dimension, in that you will find frequently in mathematical texts elements that do not depend on a specific language. I mean by that, for instance, algebraic formulas in which you have Latin and Greek letters, or numeration systems, or other more or less standardized mathematical symbols, and etc. So you have in mathematical texts all those elements which are present and which do not really depend on a specific language, but are rather standardized elements in mathematical communities. On the other hand, modern mathematical texts are not independent from any specific language, because you will find in them discursive elements, discursive explanations, discursive arguments, proofs, and stuff like that. And this entails, obviously, linguistic issues, especially in the case of transnational circulations of those texts. And so my questions today is first to understand how did and how do actually mathematicians overcome such difficulties, although nowadays the mathematical production is mainly in English. It has not always been the case. And the other question is that of the historiographical outcomes and challenges that such a focus brings. The specific context in which I'm going to study these questions is that of the appropriation of Soviet mathematics in the Cold War United States. So just a few reminders for contextual informations. First, on Soviet science in the late Stalin era, it was actually the case that before World War II, the Soviet literature would usually be published mostly in Russian, but there would also be often articles published in English, in German, or in French. For instance, there was a whole series of printed volumes of the proceedings of the Academy of Science of the Soviet Union in French, and you would usually find abstracts in different languages. Now, this situation changed in 1947 when scientists were forbidden from publishing abroad. They were also forbidden from traveling abroad, and then all the Soviet literature was basically written in Russian, with sometimes abstracts found in other national languages such as Ukrainian or Georgian. Now, the other side of the issue is that of accessing Soviet mathematics in the United States, which during the Cold War was interesting in keeping up with the opposing superpower. And one difficulty in that was that the scientific and technical personnel in the United States scarcely read Russian or knew anything about Russian. So it was quite hard for the United States audience to access this literature. And so there was a need to overcome those linguistic barriers with the Soviet Union, the Soviet literature. And what I want to focus on is how this was done and what were the difficulties, the challenges that actors encountered in this. And so Solomon Lefschetz is actually going to provide me with a case study for that. So who was this Lefschetz? to quote him, he was a mathematical emigre in the United States. This is because he was born in Moscow. He was a Russian national. He was born in Moscow in the late 19th century. And he didn't stay there for long. He actually was raised and trained here in Paris, but a century ago, he was trained in engineering at the École Centrale, and then he moved to the United States in 1905. There he started to work as an electrical engineer, and he had a quite short career in that because eventually he had a work accident which left him without both hands, and so he had to change his career path, and he turned to his passion for mathematics and took a PhD in 1911. And this marked the beginning of his career as a mathematician in the United States universities, which culminated with his hiring at Princeton University in 1924, but he stayed there for his whole career until he was retired in 1953. Another aspect of Lefschetz's life is his prominent, important linguistic skills. He was fluent in many languages, English, French, and Russian, because of his migration path, but also other languages, for instance, Spanish, German, or Italian. So he could keep up individually with foreign literature. And the last aspect, and that's the one I'm going to more develop here, is Lefschetz's encounter with the Soviet literature on differential equations, which had occurred during World War II, when he was working as a consultant for the United States Navy. And during this time, he focused on differential equations, which was not his main research interest at the time. And he discovered first the importance of this topic for applications, including for military technologies, and second, the importance of the so-called Soviet school in this field. So after World War II, what Lefschetz did was that he started a project centered on differential equations, which was sponsored by the military, more specifically by what was called the Office of Naval Research, which was an institution created after World War II by the Navy, with the aim of sustaining links established between the military and the scientists during World War II. And so how this institution would work was basically it would allocate funds to carry out research projects. So this sounds quite familiar nowadays, but actually at that time it was quite an innovation. And what Lefschetz did, and you have this caption of a description of his project on the left side of the screen, was ask for money to this institution to develop a project on differential equations aiming at developing knowledge in the United States on the subject, because he was worried about how backwards the scientific communities in the United States were comparing to their Soviet counterparts. And so one of the aims of this project, as you can see here, was to translate the advanced Russian developments in this field. Now, how the project functioned was basically, so it lasted for 12 years at Princeton University, and the most prominent part of it was devoted to the training of mathematicians in differential equations, with specific focus on the importance of applications of this topic, including military and industrial ones. And the project would also invite foreign mathematicians, but that was only when it was possible. And obviously, such was not the case for Soviet mathematicians at that time. So the project had to actually go into the translations of those Soviet works. So what did they translate actually? They ended up translating 2 books in the span of the project. The first one is Theory of Oscillations by Alexandre Andronov and Semyon Khaikin, which is here on the left side. That's the English translation, which was published in 1949. And the second one was the Qualitative Theory of Differential Equations by Vladimir Nemetsky and Vyacheslav Stepanov. This second one was published actually after the end of the project in 1960. And so the questions which I want to focus on now are threefold. First, how did these works were selected? Second, how were they translated? And third, what were the outcomes of those translations? And to dive into those questions, to explore them, I'm going to focus most specifically on the first book, which was translated, Theory of Oscillations. So you can see here on the left side the original cover of the book, which was published in 1937. The authors of the book were actually 3 physicists, mathematicians. So there's a slight difference in scientific disciplines in the Soviet Union. So this physicist mathematician is sort of like a mathematical physicists with also a focus on experimentations. And so the authors were Alexander Andronov, Semyon Khaikin, and also Alexander Witt, which was actually not mentioned as an author of the book, because the very same year he was arrested in the Stalin era during the purges, and he was sent to the Gulag, where he died 1 year later. So the question of selecting this work can actually be answered by looking at the preface to the English edition written by Lefschetz, in which he mentions the fact that this book became known to the world at large through Dr. Nikolai Minovsky's Introduction to Nonlinear Mechanics, which was a book written by a former collaborator of Lefschetz during his World War II military experience. And so the great interest evoked by this excellent book, that of Minovsky, provided a strong incentive for making available to the scientific and technical public the text of Andronov and Khaikin. So, according to Lefschetz himself, the incentive actually came from the interest for a book within scientific and technical personnel in the United States, which, according to the introduction to this book by Minovsky, substantially relied on Andronov and Khaikin's book. So this on the, thank you for the notice. This on the bottom right side of the screen is an excerpt of the introduction, in which Minovsky states that the preparation of the book was facilitated by the availability of 2 works, the second one being already translated by Lefschetz. So Theory of Oscillation was translated by this group around Lefschetz, but the question now is how it was done. And I want to focus here on, well, maybe I'm just gonna rush this. So on the left side, you have this excerpt of the preface again. So the first part in green basically shows that there was some sort of organization of the work at hand. There was a separation between a technical translator, Natasha Golovskaya, who did a draft translation of the book. And then there was a substantial editorial work carried out by several members of Lefschetz's project, who were mathematicians. So Lefschetz, Joseph Lassalle, Lawrence Roach, Karl Langenhope, and Albert Farnell. So there's this sort of division of labor. That's one first thing that I found interesting in this. And the other thing is that there were specific guidelines for edition, which were motivated by the intended audience of this book, this translation, which were American, non-Russian readers mostly. And so the Lefschetz develops this and says that they did actually some editing in the book. They scaled down some mathematical developments to narrow them down to practical aspects. They reduced or suppressed theoretical discussions, and they substantially reworked the mathematical treatments. Another aspect on which I'm maybe going to rush a bit, this is the table of content of the book, and more specifically of chapter 5 of the book, which Lefschetz claims to have substantially modified. And so I've overlined several parts of it with this callers, just to outline the fact that there were structural changes which were carried out in this translation. So you see that there are parts which have been moved to the first section, to the introduction, some parts which have been purely suppressed, some moved in appendix, some of them divided in different sections, and finally the whole chapter was restructured as 3 different chapters in the translation. So there's actually a substantial structural transformation of this book, and it's not the only chapter in which this occurs, and this entails some modifications in the economy of the text. And now to finish, I want to focus on one specific section. This is section 10 of this chapter, in which the authors, Andronov, Chaikin, and Witt, introduce a notion. Actually, I may lack of time for this. So they introduce a notion which is called course systems. And I'm not going to discuss what those course systems mean, mathematically speaking. I'm just going to discuss the general organization of the discussion around this concept in the original and the translated edition. So in the original edition, you have this requirement, the course system property. Okay, that's 1 minute, right? Yes, okay.
We can go into the question section to finish it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be done soon. So they introduced this property which severely restricts the considered class of differential equations, whereas on the other side, for the translated edition, this is a very natural assumption to make. The justification is quite different. On the one hand, you have the original edition, which justifies the introduction of this through considerations on modelization and observations, which we could label as pragmatic, whereas in the translated edition, this is moved to the appendix, not in the original chapter, and it's justified as a physical necessity to exclude certain systems, physical systems, which do not have this property. The mathematical concepts at hand are changed. In the Soviet edition, there are 2 different concepts, course system and peculiar system, which is the opposite concept. This second concept is lost in the translated edition, and the first concept is renamed as structural stability. And then there are some developments which are substantially abridged in the translated edition. So overall, there are different epistemologies underlying those 2 texts. There are different status for those concepts, and in the end, this entails some substantial conceptual changes. And so what we can see when we look at this is that the translinguistic elements remain stable. The same mathematical definition, but the surrounding discourse is substantially transformed again. I'm going to skip this. This is about the circulation of structural stability in the United States, and just say that it was first in Lefschetz's project, and then it got out of it, and it was one of the elements for a Fields Medal in 1966 for Stefan Smale. This is just a summary of Lefschetz's translations work, and I'm just going to jump to some conclusive thoughts on this. First on actors who have to overcome linguistic barriers. So as I've said, this requires skills, linguistic and technical, and this may require therefore some collective work, some division of labor, some funds, some connections to publish the book, etc. An aspect which I find particularly interesting is that and I'm probably going to conclude on that and leave it open, is how, in this case, translation as circulation of knowledge is both production of knowledge and communication. What I mean by that is that the substantial operations which are done on the text, textual, structural, conceptual, epistemological operations, which are carried out so as to adapt the text for the intended audience, result in the making of new knowledge, so to speak, and that this may well open new avenues of research, such was the case for this structural stability concept. And I'm going to conclude on that because I think I'm done with time, but this is it. Thank you very much for listening, and if we have time for question, I'm all ears.
We have the time for one quick question. I saw hands raised, but
Yeah,
then,
we
yeah.
have a question from Frappier from online.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. This will be a very good question. So I was thinking in the case of knowledge control, right? Because we're talking on the Cold War.
Yes.
I was thinking whether the author you are talking about was not labeled as a spy of the Soviet Union, because he's using the knowledge of the Soviet Union. So I was thinking that whether how the US government in this case permitted the use of this type of knowledge during this time, and how it managed to do so. Because until what I know is that until Nikita Khrushchev arrived to power, the situation between the US and the USSR relaxed, but before it was kind of two closed worlds. So thank you very much again.
So when you're saying spy, do you refer to Lefschetz?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Because I think that everyone that was close to the Soviet Union in this case was labeled as a spy, until what I know, because we had several examples that John Krieger basically have talked about.
Sure.
In this case, maybe some Chinese scientists like Hao Wang. That's what came to my mind.
Yeah, sure. So actually Lefschetz, so I obviously have no sources to document the fact that he was a spy, because that would mean going to the archives of the Soviet Union in Russia, and this is currently hard to do, as you can guess. But there's been actually investigations on Lefschetz during the McAfee era in the United States. So I think it's around 53 or 54. He was investigated as a potential spy or someone who had who couldn't be trusted, and he was actually cleared of any charges. The fact is that in the end he was a United States national, and he actually opposed communism. He was so yeah. He was not like full supportive of the United States politics abroad. You could see that he had some critical positions and certain issues, but overall he was loyal to the United States, and he was a citizen of it, which allowed him to actually get some military sponsors for instance. And he actually had some military sponsors for quite a long time, not just for this time in Princeton, but also for some time afterwards, and also this time which he did during World War II. That's actually, he's not the only one in this case. Minorsky, the other scientist, which I've briefly mentioned, was also a Russian immigrant, but he was also opposed to the communist regime in the Soviet Union. Thank you for your question.
Thank you for that. I'm going to stop the question now because we need to jump to the very last speaker before the round table, which I've asked the organizers to start a bit late so we can truly enjoy our last talk. Rongrong comes to us from the National Bureau of International Communications of the China International Communications Group. And she's going to talk about how modern mathematics affected the visual art world in the 20th century. Thank you for joining us.
So thanks very much for the organizer of the conference and for everyone of the speakers and the audience. So would everyone please hear me and have a nice vision of the screen? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so I may start. So my topic is how modern mathematics affected the visual art world, interdisciplinary transit of science knowledge in the 20th century case. So after listening the previous two presentations, I realized that I may bring about some discussions about the overlap of mathematics and the visual art and design. So I'm a research associate of China International Communications Group under the direction of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I'm also a practitioner of digital art. So my area is mainly about the overlap of science and visual art. So I will get into the topic with a simple contemporary example, a program of Victory Boogie Woogie. What is a Victory Boogie Woogie? It is a painting of Mondrian, and the program is to use the computer simulation to try to analyze how Mondrian created his work and try to produce something like Mondrian's work with computer programs. Is created by about 2019 in the Journal of Mathematics and Arts. So with a series of trials and errors, and with the final production. So the question is about, so why the painting of Mondrian becomes a very vivid contemporary example to analyze the relationship of computing art and art history. So what is the actual connection of mathematics and modern art movement? So let's go back to the 20th century case. As researchers of history of math, I think you may recognize the picture on the left, which is a popularization of 19th century mathematics, more specifically the popularization of Poincaré's theory of algebra and the visualization of four dimension. It is tested. It is clearly recorded in the history that a group of important modern artists have viewed this popular science book, including Marcel Duchamp and Picasso. So if you look at the early works of Marcel Duchamp and Picasso, we can realize the affection of the pictures from the early images of the popularization of 19th and 20th century math. And Marshall Duchamp also has a particular interest in projection geometry. You can see the in a few of his installations, and he uses the nature of projection geometry to create the special effect of his installation work. When we analyze the interactions of the 20th century mathematics and visual arts, the school of Bourbaki is one of the major topic to focus. One of the important and simple example left by the school of Bourbaki is the definition of function, injection, surjection, and bijection. It reflects the spirit of the school of Bourbaki that it is the structure and the relationship between and among objects that are more important than the details. So the spirit of their theory affected not only the field of science, but also the field of a lot of fields of modern social and humanity areas like sociologists and the psychologists. And you can see in the map of mathematics, on the top is the movement of category theory, and is a direct derivative of the Bourbaki school. To mention the Bourbaki school here is to make a connection of theoretical math and modern art movement. One of the initiator of the Bourbaki school was very deeply affected by the art of Picasso and the Cubism. You may also recognize the picture on the top, which is the truth table from Henry Rousseau and Wittgenstein, which tries to reflects the philosophical process to discriminate concepts and the language and the meaning. So the philosophical process of discrimination also reflected in the development of modern art movement. You can see the very famous René Magritte's painting, and the painting. The meaning of the painting is to differentiate the meaning of visual and the meaning of language, which is a direct product of the development of the mathematical philosophy of the century. In the 21st century, in our century, although the discussions of Henry Rousseau and Wittgenstein has passed, and the truth table has been a legacy of mathematics, but we can still see the legacy of their discussions in Gary Hill's digital installations. Gary Hill is a pioneer in digital art, and he is now in his 80s, and he in his digital installations, he still tries to discuss what is the meaning of language concept and the visual concept. I'm sorry, this is a few Chinese descriptions. This is a painting of Dali, named the Corpse Hypercubes. Dali doesn't. We can see that in the painting, he borrowed the image of borrowed the image of hypercubes, which he didn't invent himself, but borrowed from the science popularization book I just mentioned before. So he's also among the group of modern artists that were affected by the process of science, especially mathematics in his century. So the two pictures here I show are by Ryoki Akida. He is one of the media artists worldwide in our century, and the two of these digital installations are produced from his residency in the center of CERN, the center of the European Center of Nuclear Research. So why the scientific institutions like CERN opened the artistic residency and their contemporary art exhibition program since the 1980s. And NASA opened their contemporary art program in 1950s and 60s, I think. The case of CERN was especially about the introduction of performance art and media art. So in my opinion, it is a response to Einstein's open questions that is still not solved in scientifically and philosophically. So they borrow the perspective and the voices of art to the ontology questions. So what are the two installations about by Ryoki Akida? The installations are called supersymmetry. So it is very easily to be seen as the visualization of some physical data from experiment, but it's not, because supersymmetry is supersymmetry is not from experiment, but it is a suspicion without conclusion. So the work of Ryoki Akida is an extension of scientific archive, but not a visualization of the existing experiment. So I would like to elaborate more about, or to bring up more about how to, or a question more about the research about mathematics and visual arts. So why put this picture here? It is an Indian picture depicting the important Indian god named Shiva and his consort. So in the Indian philosophy and Indian religion, so the world starts and destroys circularly, and in the between of the destruction and the start of the new world, the god Shiva and his consort floats on the time on the river of time. So how is this related to mathematics? As I studied the history of mathematics, I got information that Indians invented the concept of zero. So there are piles of studies questioning and try to find the answer that why it is Indians that invented the concept of zero, right? So, but there are very little study from the artistic or the visual point of view. So in my opinion, it is related to the circular nature of their religion and philosophy. So it is an example of the Islamic patterns, as we all know, as we can find in architecture and design and also contemporary art. And it is nature, it is a natural, it's a natural product, I think, of algebra, or abstract algebra from modern point of view. And why the local community could produce such kind of art. So how the knowledge of abstract art communicate through or circulate in the in the medieval world. So it is and how the knowledge condescends, or how the knowledge become the are transformed into artistic creations. So these are the questions I would like to raise to the researchers. And also into some discussions of the difference of 20th century and 21st century. So when we compare 20th century and 21st century, we can see a very clear differentiation of science revolution and technology revolution. So here the two pictures are the digital artwork from artificial intelligence and the artificial intelligence archaeology system in the Metropolitan Museum. So is NLP more rational or ambiguous? So this is the question of science history overlapping art history, how it extends into our time. So perhaps I don't have much time left. So here we get into the topic of visualizing science, as could be traced to Kepler. As artists, we know that Escher he doesn't belong to any important modern art movement. But if we look at his collaboration with mathematicians and the physicists, we can see a very clear relationship of his work and the modern history of mathematics. So in Paint Gallery, Escher depicts a painting. Escher depicts a painting which seamlessly transforms into the view of the surrounding town. Escher allegedly hoped for the image to repeat infinitely, but left the center of the image empty. 50 years after, mathematician Hendrik Lenstra and his colleagues from the University of Leiden figured out how to correctly create his illusion using elliptic curve theory and conformal maps, and completed the writing. So in the topic of visualized science, we can always refer to music, from Pythagoras' number rules the universe to 20th centuries and 19th and 20th century Schoenberg's modern music system. We can tell that the tie of music and mathematics is historical. The tie of music and the modern art movement is contemporary, as we can see in the Launay and the Mondrian's paintings. And the tie of music and digital art is contemporary. So the relationship of mathematics, music, and visual art is historical and the meantime contemporary. So as tolling from the mathematics, music, and visual art tie, we can is mainly from the view of computing art and the programming. So here are some of the artworks constructed from visualizing of data, and it is a visualizing of natural climate and also universe. And also elaborations of origami, as the right picture was collected by the professor in MIT, Eric Demain. He is in the computer science department. And the picture, however, the examples in the picture are collected from the history of the design history of Bauhaus, that Eric Demain discovered a connection of the mathematical origami, the engineering computing with the modern history of design in Bauhaus. And the picture on the left is reflect the working process of digital artist Quayula, who archives the classics paintings and murals and sculptures and process them with computer programs, and creates creates media works like this. I'm not sure in your opinion whether it belongs to part of the mathematical history, but it is clearly a derivative of mathematical history and its overlap with modern computing. So the picture in the left is a sculpture created by Simpson Simons from a memory, and perhaps it looks like something created from the computer, but it is not. It is or it is from the product of very early computer. It is a product from the artist's residency in a physics department in 1950s or 1960s. And the picture on the right is a public art piece, also using the self-organized origami program by an architect. So here I leave the open question about the prospects of researching the relationship of mathematics of art and visual art and design. So I'm open to the critiques and collaborations. Thanks very much.
What a beautiful way to finish the conference. Because the next session, I have the next session to start a bit later, so we can go get a break. But since we're over time for just one short question. Letitia.
So I was surprised that you didn't focus more on geometry, as it seems to me as a kind of mathematical field, especially historically, geometry is because it addresses shape and puzzles and problems and connections of shape, transformations through shape, and of course the visual arts expressed through shape. And then, you know, one of the things that's striking about computing is that it's linear, right? You get something digital and linear. And so, you know, the actual computer languages aren't interesting plot shape, even if their output is sometimes expressed through various shapes. So it seems to me like that's where the action is. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were and why you don't engage geometry more.
the answer is that I think for audiences, for natural audiences of my thesis in different area, because I also presented this to the art audience as well. So geometry is clearly not the only topic to mention, but it is the but it is most universal topic for the audience in different disciplines to recognize. And in the discipline, or in the very small, in this very narrow area of the relationship of mathematics and art, there are very abstract topics like the relationship of the logicism with the development of conceptual modern art, the installation of Duchamp and René Magritte, and how the Dali's painting about death is related to the mysticism in the 20th century mathematics. I talk more about geometry simply because in my in my experience of writing and presenting, I think the communication about the conceptual part of the interactions of mathematics and humanities takes more time. Yes, it takes more time for me to communicate this with my audience. But but the topics is surely very abstract. It can be, yeah.
Well, thank you again for all our speakers. Those who are here have 10 minutes to grab a coffee in a paper cup and a sweet and get to Alumni Hall for our last sessions. For those online, you can already jump into the next sessions and we will see you there. Thank you again for speakers.